Hello and welcome to yet another Ask Us Anything session. Today we have a special guest, but before I introduce the special guest, I'm going to do a bit of self-marketing. First of all, you need to like this video, you need to subscribe to the channel, you need to join the channel if you can afford it, and you need to convince your boss to sponsor the channel. Do all the things you do on YouTube, right? No need for me to tell you all that stuff. And the second thing I need to highlight before we start or introduce our guest is that we, meaning this channel and another channel and me and Darin and so on and so forth, were nominated in 3 categories for DevOps dozen awards. And you should, there we go, there's the animation. You should go and vote according to your conscience. There are many categories. Just go and vote for stuff that you feel are the best in each category. And if that happens to be us, even better. Thank you so much for doing that. And now let me introduce the guest. The guest is Vadim. I will not say anything about him because he will introduce himself. Go ahead.
Hello.
Tell us who you are.
Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Vadim Bauer. I'm located here in Switzerland. I'm very happy to be here in the show. I'm the maintainer of the project or CNCF project Harbor. I work a lot with containers, container registries, and I run also a company. It's called 8 Gears Container Registry, which is coincidentally a Harbor-backed container registry as a service, where we do a lot of consulting and service around containers and container registries. And I'm a big fan of Kubernetes, and we use it ourselves. So I'm happy to be here and answer your questions.
And before we already have a couple of questions, so keep them coming. First of all, everybody watching, keep posting the questions. The sooner you post your question, the bigger the chance that it will be answered. And before we continue, we have a new member of the channel, Havoc Industries. Thank you so much for becoming a member. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Now let's go into the questions. And the first one is going to take us around 8 hours to answer. Right? What are the must-know things for Kubernetes for DevOps architect? I don't know where to start. Vadim, I don't know. I'll pass it to you, man.
I think before we can, we don't have too much time to cover everything, but I think we need to get a bit more of a context and make maybe a few assumptions about the type of DevOps architect. Not all DevOps architects are created equally, and they're all working in a different organization structures and also have different responsibilities. So it might be you're a DevOps architect in a Kubernetes focused environment, and then there are of course Kubernetes specific topics, and maybe you're a DevOps engineer in a AWS EKS environment. So there are a lot of things that you need to know in this area. So I would say, of course, the must-have know things is about Kubernetes. Like if you're a DevOps architect, you need to understand Kubernetes inside out. So you need to really understand how Kubernetes is working, not just from deploying application perspective, but also the inner workings and the possibilities that you have with Kubernetes. So like thinking a bit more, not out of the box, but thinking more in ahead, what capabilities are there in Kubernetes that you can reuse for your application or for your application landscape? If you're an architect, you're probably responsible for more than one application. So I think this is, in my opinion, a crucial part of being a DevOps architect in a Kubernetes environment. Like how can you leverage what Kubernetes provides you? Not only the ecosystem monitoring, the service mesh, and everything that it's there, but like how can you use Kubernetes really as a platform? Not just a tool where you deploy your software, but as a platform to leverage your software, or make it easier for your software to to operate and to roll out and not to work.
One thing I would add is that besides understanding Kubernetes, especially starting with basics, right? Kind of silly things like what is a deployment, how is relation between deployment and a replica set, and why does replica set create pods? Why wouldn't you create pods immediately? So basic stuff. But eventually, I think it's very important, and one thing that many people, I feel, forget or don't do is that it's not only about knowing Kubernetes and waiting for other people to give you application and then you run it in Kubernetes, but you need to influence the architecture of those applications themselves before they get into Kubernetes, right? Because depending on how your application is structured, how it is designed, and so on and so forth, you will get great or horrible results by running it in Kubernetes. So I would say it's eventually you need to balance kind of not only Kubernetes itself, but also going out and influencing other teams.
Mhm. Yeah, because
And
you're gonna be.
thanks to Kaz for donating. Thank you so much.
Mm.
Sorry, Vadim, I interrupted you.
Oh, but you're right. I mean, you're gonna be the responsible person. People will approach and ask you for help. How can you help them, design, build applications for Kubernetes and deploy and operate them efficiently on Kubernetes. So you need to, like as a long-term goal, this is something that you need to achieve. But like the first step, of course, the basics of Kubernetes, and also like the simple things of Kubernetes are actually the important ones. Like the pod configuration, the scheduling, the memory limits. All those nitty-gritty things that are actually not very complicated to understand. Once you grasp the concept, but mostly neglected because it's this tedious work. You need to figure out what's the right settings and things like this. So it's a bit cumbersome. So I would say it's how do you call it? It's kind of a labor-intensive work. Doesn't involve a lot of brain power, but it needs to be done, and it's really important, and you need to understand all the details in there.
Okay, let's go to thank you, Kaz, for donating first, or whatever it's called. And question is, do you have a video on doing deployments for SaaS multi-tenancy? Or any recommendation for using something like Q+? I haven't used Q+, so I cannot comment on that one. But specifically around using Argo, Kubevela, Crossplane, Harbor together. I don't have a video on doing it together yet. But let me see, Argo, Kubevela, Crossplane, Harbor. Yes, that's a big surprise for 2023. I think that Vadim knows the hints of that already. Anyways, there will be a series about connecting all CNCF projects together and letting people choose the path that best fits their needs. It's a series of, we'll see about format, but it's a series that me and Whitney will be doing in 2023. It's going to take us at least a year or longer. So the answer to that question is starting from January. And we will have a lot of guests, like Vadim will be one of our guests when it comes to container image registries or registries in general. But stay tuned until second half of January. How to shift to DevOps area after 10 years of experience in IT? I will assume that by IT, Sharat means ops or sysadmin type of stuff, I'm guessing. And shifting to DevOps, I don't know how you see it, Vadim, but to me, DevOps is everything and nothing. It really depends on what somebody means when they say DevOps. Kind of like, I don't even know what it means. But what I do believe, at least from my point of view, is that it's really all in big part about helping others be able to do stuff, right? Today, I think that from the naming terms, that's why we see a lot of talks lately, and that will be all the rage in 2023 about platform engineering. So, it's not only about doing things that we were doing before, whatever sysadmins or ops people were doing, but it's about enabling others. So how can you, let's say, use Kubernetes in a way that you can provide something to your peers, let's say developers, to be able to define applications themselves, right? Or deploy applications themselves, and so on and so forth. So that's the focus I think that everybody should be having when thinking about how do I switch to DevOps. Is you're not doing stuff that much for others, all exclusively for others anymore. Oh, I need a cluster, right? Oh, I need something is wrong with my application. Tell me what's wrong, but enabling them how people can do it themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the misconception about or the assumption about DevOps as being a role that is isolated from let's say a developer, like there's a developer and there is a DevOps, and there's like two two different roles. It's not the case. Actually, a developer can be also a DevOps person, right? So or can be have responsibility in a DevOps, and I think with the modern uh, tooling and infrastructure operations like Kubernetes containers, every developer can or should be or can be a DevOps person. So it's not something you need to kind of apply as a job. Like say, I want to become a DevOps engineer and I want to apply to this job. I think most engineers nowadays, if they're working in a containerized cloud environment, uh, can take on this responsibility and say, look, I would like to take more you know, in this DevOps area, I would want to do more in this DevOps area. I want to, have the end-to-end responsibility from just not coding software, but also, deploying it, operating it, and these areas. And I think in most companies, they really appreciate it if developers takes this responsibility. And I think this is the ideal way how you could move into this area. And this is also maybe how I entered the DevOps world.
There we go. What's the next one? We have DevSecOps. Okay, this is more concrete. I like this one a bit more. I mean, I like all the questions. I don't know what I'm talking about. How can we get accomplish connection draining when deploying new version of an application in deployment using rolling updates? How does old pod manage traffic? Our app is on Socket, so please create a video on Socket-based app with horizontal. My brain is fried today. HA, high availability. You want to give it a try, shall I?
Give it a try. I need to figure out the details.
It's a long one, but ignoring now whether it's this type of connection, whether it's HTTP or something else, among other things, what happens when you do rolling updates, right? First, you get a new pod based on a new release. And then Kubernetes goes to the old pod based on the old release, and sends SIG-term signal, right? And this is not specific to containers. This is on any Linux system, right? You would get something similar deploying it without containers even. Anyways, Kubernetes sends a signal, says, I'm going to shut you down, and I'm going to wait for your response that's okay to do. If you don't say anything, I'm going to shut you down forcefully, right? So your application gets a signal, it's going to be shut down, and then it's responsibility of your application to finish whatever you're doing and send back the signal saying it's okay now, right? Now, in parallel with that, what is happening is that Kubernetes stops sending new requests to that pod, right? So you're not getting new traffic, and you're getting a signal that you should tell Kubernetes that it's okay to shut you down, right? So in other words, between not getting new requests, you have certain period of time to terminate all the requests, do all the processing that you need to do, and then you shut down, right? So new requests immediately go to the new release. Old requests are waiting to be shut down. That's the short version of it.
Yeah, a question.
Sure.
Follow-up question. So does the traffic really switches from the ingress from one pod to another pod if the other pod is still running?
Yes. I mean, that you will still have, so if you have multiple replicas, let's say you have 10 replicas of application, right? Only one of those 10, so 9 will continue receiving requests with the old release. One new one based on the new release will also start receiving requests, but one of those will stop receiving requests, right?
Yeah.
And it's not really ingress; it's a service doing the stuff.
Yes,
at least
yes,
in a
exactly.
simplified version.
Yeah, but the pod needs to be healthy in order to receive requests, because otherwise
Yeah,
the service will not route traffic to the pod
of course.
if the pod is not up and running correctly.
Exactly. You mean
Yeah.
the pod of the new release?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there are quite a few other steps. But in a
Yeah.
nutshell, you get a signal, and it's your responsibility to figure out what you need to do to safely be shut down. What's the future of Harbor Operator? Okay, if don't, this must be you. I'm not answering this one.
Good question, Scott. So there is quite a few interesting discussions going on currently in the Harbor Operator world. So the Harbor Operator that is there today in Harbor. So there is, for everyone else, there is a component in Harbor which is called the Harbor Operator, and the Harbor Operator fulfills two requirements. The first requirement is it is able to deploy your Harbor instance, to Kubernetes, and the second responsibility of the operator is configuring the Harbor application itself. And so it has these two roles combined in one single package. And the limitation of the Harbor operator is that it's doing, on one hand, the installation and also the configuration. So it kind of interweaved. And the idea is, or my idea here is to maybe split it up in a installation part of Harbor, an operator that is doing the installation part, and one operator that does the configuration part. So it is able to configure Harbor itself, like the basic configuration, like the identity provider setup, the setup, how long the token is valid, all those configuration setting, and then also on the next level, the configuration of projects, like projects, users, so you're able to create new projects, new users with the operator, assigned permissions to projects or to users, and generate token that user can use to fetch images. So this is the idea, and currently, or luckily, there are quite a few people working on this already. So there are a few companies who are interested in contributing to this effort and having a much more rich operated or operated is capable of doing everything that you could do in the UI, just as a custom resource definition. So this is the future of the operator that I see it, and we need to, in the next weeks and months, we need to align inside the community how others are seeing it, and we come with a solution that hopefully satisfies everyone. But I can tell you that there is a lot of effort going on here now since a couple of weeks to unify and consolidate, because currently there are, to my knowledge, there are at least 3 operators for Harbor, and it would make a lot of sense to bring all the people together and work on the same goal here.
Thank you so much. Now from Steve. Steve, share your knowledge about running Kubernetes on single board computer. I never run it on single board computer, so I have no idea. I don't know if you have any experience on that one, Vadim.
I can tell a bit because in a similar experience, because we're running Kubernetes in test environments where we have a single node Kubernetes where we test a few functionalities. So it's pretty much similar to a single board computer. You probably mean something like a Raspberry Pi, Steve. So I assume something like that. So it is, I mean, with K3S, it's definitely possible, and it's a really good solution to do so. I know even a few companies in the embedded world who are operating Kubernetes on edge and industrial environments. So there is definitely people who are using it like this already, in production environments, and it's definitely possible to do so. Yeah, and this is the recommendation I can give you. Like it's definitely possible. People are doing it. The resource use is manageable. Like K3s is really low on resources. The VPN stuff like Tailscale, there are plenty of options. There are a lot of options inside the Kubernetes ecosystem, like not only Tailscale, but also like this overlay networks that are like VPN based. So there are a lot of options how this can be achieved, and you can get the connectivity from the edge to your in-house network or whatever you want to connect to.
Amazing. So what's next? Scott, what would you consider to be the best way to develop apps to run in Kubernetes? I'm thinking along the lines of Dapper or telepresence. What is the best tool in your opinion? I might be confused here, but Dapper is not necessarily directly related with development.
I think
It's
he
more
means
like
local
what you
development.
run
Huh?
in production. Huh?
I think he means like, because Dapper telepresence, I think he is like developing on Kubernetes. So
Yeah.
it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I use telepresence for development and Octeto and DevSpace. I think that Loft is contributing their tool. Now my brain stopped which one it is as well to CNCF soon. So there are quite a few for development. I'm just not, my brain is having difficulties to fit Dapper in that image. But telepresence is great, mostly for being able to connect what you're developing with something else running somewhere else, right? So you have your application running locally, let's say, and you want to connect it to a database running somewhere else or backend application running somewhere else. Absolutely amazing. There are many others. I would, for example, strongly recommend checking DevSpace. DevSpace fulfills a different need, like how can you attach your code to the application running in Kubernetes and synchronize that code whenever you make changes. Octeto is doing similar thing. Dapper, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether you have any other thoughts on Dapper, but I see Dapper more like, okay, once we do it for real somewhere, once we reach production, how does my application connect to some store somewhere, Kafka, let's say, and how do we send messages or receive messages, things like that. It's more like, I would put Dapper in almost as a replacement of Service Mesh in a way. That's 2 cents. Miroslav, single tenant application consisting of 20 plus services deployed multiple times, namespace per tenant, with different configs for each of those. You can see the problem. Any tips how to manage deploy it? I don't know about you, but I'm scared always running tenants in a different namespaces. That's almost asking for trouble. I mean, you need to be very, very You mean maybe if your tenants really don't have any control, they cannot do anything but kind of just use the application. Maybe then.
I think, yeah, it's like, is it a single tenant application only? The question here, like, it's just as the tenant is accessing the application.
Okay, it's one tenant. One tenant. Okay, one tenant, and then
so
services deployed multiple times. But you know what confuses me is that it says namespace per tenant.
Mm-hmm.
So there are multiple tenants.
Yeah, and each tenant has a namespace, but I think the tenants are not accessing Kubernetes; they're just accessing the application.
So okay, if that's what they're doing, and you know what you're doing, you're not leaving any holes through, I don't know, through requests that to access application, which will access the system and be able to access the rest of the pods. Yeah, should work.
I think like having a really multi-tenant Kubernetes is very, very difficult. You need a lot of deep knowledge about isolating the namespaces, and there are a lot of open source projects around it that try to solve the problem. But I think it's still a very difficult endeavor. And in today's way on how we deploy and operate Kubernetes, how easy it is, like to deploy and operate a next instance of Kubernetes. I think I would also like try to figure out if it's more feasible to spin up another cluster versus slice a cluster into in multiple namespaces. And to the other problem you mentioned, Miroslav, like the problem on how to deploy it. So how to manage and deploy it. So we're actually at our service are similar in regards that you are here right now. So we have also a multi-tenant harbor, or we have a harbor that we deploy per tenant, and we've been iterating over all these areas like your kube manifest, customize, Helm, and now I think we found our sweet spot, what and how we are doing things, and we started using CDK 8S, and I'm really happy that such a tool exists like CDK 8S, because for me as a developer, it makes it really easy to code my deployment. So I don't have to deal with like Helm templating things or customize overlays, which can be quite cumbersome, and manage it outside. So I can just really code everything. I have my application that I can code out, and I have my flows there, and I can decide, okay, this tenant is doing that, and this tenant is going on this cluster, and I can just code everything clearly in my application. I can test it, and I can run the deployment, and it's there. So it's really kind of a code approach that you can do with CDK 8S. And for us, it's a really big benefit on managing our deployments that way versus with YAML manifest.
Okay, what's the next one? Stefan, do you see some connection between GitOps, like Flux Argo, and Harbor in the future? Before you say anything, like we have Argo CD image updater, which essentially works with Harbor, that can monitor images deployed to a registry, including Harbor. Then it would, whenever you change, you push a specific tag, it would modify your Git repository so that Argo CD does whatever it's doing, right? Now I'm not sure whether something in that direction. Okay, actually, this is my question actually to you, Vadim. Does it even make sense that would that already be in the domain of other tools? Because I'm always having problem finding the balance, kind of like, hey, we can bloat tools to do many things, or what's the limit, right?
So I'm also a bit confused because GitOps is a pull based approach. So like Flux and Argo are pulling things, and in this case is Harbor becomes a source, a source of images where the GitOps tool can pull from it, like Flux or Argo can pull from Harbor. So the question to me is then, what can Harbor offer more that Flux and Argo can pull from? Which information can they offer next to the images that Flux and Argo can pull from? I think there are definitely more options how to get integrated, but I don't have an idea. Maybe Stefan can write a follow-up question or explanation, like
something.
What is he missing?
But I've seen also lately, I'm not convinced myself whether that's a good idea or no, but I've seen lately people packaging manifests as OCI images and then keeping them in a registry, right? And if I'm not mistaken, Harbor also now supports like Helm charts, I think.
Yeah, always.
So theoretically, you could, you could tell Argo CD, hey, here's my manifest, update that manifest and say, now use this Helm chart instead of that Helm chart, right? But that's still a push to Git first.
Mm-hmm. What I also see nowadays a bit more, especially with Flux, is people are not using Git as their source of truth. They're using OCI. So they put what you would normally have in your Git repository, they package it into OCI and push it to a registry where Flux is then pulling it from. And so the Flux is pulling OCI instead of from Git. This is what I see as a trend, and why people sometimes, who are using Flux they like it this way. Argo has also some features in that regard, but I'm not aware. I'm not certain. And yeah, this is what I see as something as a trend, or people mention it quite often.
Orlin, can you give ideas of how to start contributing to open source projects as part of your DevOps role? You want to go first? Shall I go first?
Go first. I'm thinking of Nanta.
I guess the key is really to begin with, choose to contribute to a tool you use and you're passionate about, right? Don't choose something random, kind of like, hey, I want to contribute to Linkerd and I'm not using it, right? So, because familiarity with the tool helps a lot in those first steps. And from there on, I mean, most open source community are really welcoming. And if you go to a Slack and just ask us a question like, hey, I'm a newbie, I would like to contribute. Can you give me a list of issues that you think are good for a beginner? In most cases, somebody would jump in and say, hey, how about, here's the 5 issues that are relatively straightforward, easy. Start, right? Now, the exact steps depend on a community, but in general, you fork a repository, you make a change. It can be even documentation, kind of like, it can be something silly, like comma is missing here. Fork it, create a pull request, make sure to state in the pull request whatever the instructions are for that project. And from there on, you enter into the machine. I mean, when I say machine, I mean, somebody will typically review it and give you comments and say what's good, what's bad, and eventually it gets merged back to the mainline. Just pick something you like, pick something you're familiar with, ask on a Slack channel, Discord, or whatever the community uses, what is a good issue to start with. Or go through issues yourself. And in a few cases, I did not ask anything, but I just went through the issues and say, hey, this seems silly enough, kind of like, this is something that I can do without being yet familiar with, it takes time until you're really familiar with the project, right? But there are those easy ones to pick up.
Yes, I agree. And maybe in addition to from my experience as contributor to open source project, a maintainer of various open source projects. So when you start or you plan to contribute, I think like Victor said, it's really helps a lot being a user of this product, because you know how it's working, you know its flaws and things that are not working. And if you scratch your own itch, it helps yourself and it also helps the product and the community. And it also could start if you start small, like you start small, you're fixing maybe a few bugs in documentation, like really simple things. And consistency is very important. So if you consistently provide update changes and you stick around in the community, your presence will be immediately noticed. It's not, people in the projects are not machines, it's mostly just a bunch of people. So, it's like 2, 3, 5, 10 people. Maybe in a big community, there are more. I think even in a Kubernetes community, which is huge, there are probably, I would say 100 people maybe that are really sticking around and daily there. Of course, there's much more contributors, but who are active. And in other communities, it's a handful of people. So if you stick around, you will get noticed, and then you'll be assigned tasks, or you can grab something and you can discuss and contribute on a different level than just looking at issues and fixing them. But you interact more with the people then, and people will interact with you more.
Eventually, I think, once you get into the project, understand the dynamic, you start contributing, I think the best way to approach it afterwards is for very, very selfish reasons. I'm using this project and this is bothering me, right? And it's not somebody created an issue, I'm going to solve it for somebody. I don't need it, but I would like to help John, right? I mean, that's great. It's absolutely amazing. But if you find issues that are bothering you because you're using that in production, right? And you contribute to something that is first and foremost beneficial to you, and then to others, that's a jackpot to me. Because then you're solving your problems instead of waiting for others to solve your problems. That's ideal. Okay, what's next? Oh, Miles, thank you so much for donating to the project. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. We appreciate it. And the question is, thanks again for all the work and open source knowledge you bring. I managed to get the DevOps job a few months ago and several times cited your lessons. Not a question, a statement. Thank you so much for saying that. It really helps us going, right? Kind of knowing that people find it useful. I think it's, from that perspective, to me, YouTube channel is very similar to open source projects, right? Knowing that you know that you're helping somebody, you know that somebody finds the work useful is extremely satisfying. Scott, is there a plan in Harbor to do scheduled periodic scanning of images? That must be for you, Vadim.
Yeah. Is there a plan to?
So after you push it, right? It gets scanned on a push. Even I know that, but I'm guessing some kind of a cron job or something like that.
To mine, I'm just confused now with the question, but there is
I thought that's happening already.
There is already a functionality where you can say that you want to have a scan run every day. You have a cron job there. There is already a functionality where you can run the scanner periodically.
I was sure that there is such a thing, and I was sure that I've seen it, but I didn't want to say anything because I might be mistaken.
Yeah, I'm pretty much sure that there is the option that it runs automatically. Yeah.
I mean, you can ping us later. We can check it out and get back to you, Scott. Okay, from Joao, some advice about running Apache, Hadoop, HBase, Kubernetes. I haven't run any of those two myself, so I'm blank here. I don't know about Vadim.
I know that Hadoop is used from a long time ago, that Hadoop is using HDFS. I'm not sure if they're still using it, maybe not, I don't know. Or maybe I think HBase is the foundation. So I think it boils down to the application, if it's capable to running of multi-node, and how you keep those applications in a cluster. But I have really no idea that I could.
You caught us unprepared, Joao. Next time.
Get a qualified answer,
yeah. Iberg, I'm sorry if I'm butchering anybody's name in advance. Hello, I'm working on a project that collects some data from different platforms like AWS, Azure, and I decided to split them into microservices. After processing this data in services, I'm not sure how to get their outputs and put them together to generate single output. Can you please share your thoughts? Wouldn't that be some sort of a database where you're pushing data, basically? I mean, when I say database, I'm using it now in a very broad sense of words, whether it's file system or a SQL database or in-memory database, something, right? Where everybody pushes their data independently of each other, and then you would have some kind of a service that collects it and presents it somehow, whatever that how means for you.
I would also see that. I think it's more of an application challenge here, like how to design your application. And how to mix the data together that it makes sense afterwards.
Oh, and there is a message from Stefan. Let me put it on the screen. There's the answer to the previous question to Scott. So yeah, it's scanning periodically, and they're doing it already. So yeah, there it is.
Thanks, Stefan.
What's next? In high availability deployment, both control plane and workers on bare metal, is it possible to have deployments configured in a way to have absolutely zero downtime realistically? Yes. So yes, assuming that your application, so that I think that goes back to the very beginning of today's session, that your application will get one of the replicas of your application will get a signal. Your application will terminate the existing requests and respond with OK, and it will be shut down, and all the new requests will be going to the healthy nodes, to all the other pods, no matter the release, right? And then that process repeats over and over again. Now, whether your application, now you might have application, for example, that has a very long time, needs a long time to process something, and then you might be in trouble. But assuming that processing of a request is not long-running operation, and assuming that your state is stored somewhere else, right? Because sometimes you need sticky sessions, all right? And it will not be very sticky when your pod that sticks to something is being shut down. So as long as it's, let's say, stateless, and by stateless, I mean every systems are always stateful, right? But all the information about your clients is somewhere else, then it should be fine. Miles, where do you see the state of database operators and or stateful applications in Kubernetes these days? Harbor is a stateful application, right? In a way.
In a way, yeah. I mean, the state is outsourced or outside a bit. You know, it's in a database or in a bucket or in a file system. It is definitely possible to run stateful applications on Kubernetes, and I think if you're asking about the state of operators, there are nowadays more and more operators or more work towards making classical databases like Postgres, MySQL working fine on Kubernetes. You know, Zalando with the Zalando operator had huge success, you know, making sure that Postgres is running nicely on Kubernetes. And nowadays there is this new kit on the block which is called native DB or something. What's the name? Maybe you know it, Victor.
I'm not sure about that one. I know about Whitest, for example, which is probably going in a similar direction.
Or Cloud Native DB or something. There's a new project on the blocks called Cloud Native DB, which their interesting part is they have their own stateful set. So they redefined the stateful set that is on Kubernetes in their own way to make it better work with the database. So I think we're getting there. So we're getting closer to this. To the possibilities to run stateful applications, like the classical stateful application, like databases, easy and successful on Kubernetes. But I would still prefer not using databases on Kubernetes if the cloud provider has another database at hand.
I would say use everything as a service, not only database, but especially database. Yeah. You know, one of the mistakes I think that many of us made in that regard, but this equally applies to many other areas, is that initially people were trying to make something work in Kubernetes by using out-of-the-box Kubernetes constructs. Like, hey, I have a stateful set, therefore that's meant to be used for stateful applications. And if I convert my application, like let's say a database, into stateful set, it will work. And that's not the case. Kubernetes, what comes out of the box in Kubernetes is too primitive for anything complex, and that's by design, right? That's where operators come in, and that's why I think more and more of the projects are moving, not only to operators that help you do operations, like, hey, this is how I do this is how I do that, but also that will manage pods directly, right? Essentially replacing stateful sets. Because it's just too primitive for anything complex. And that's by design, right? You're not supposed to use stateful sets, or even deployments, I would go as far directly. Okay. I have, from secure coding development, I have 3 development environments, each in Azure Kubernetes service independent. I must deploy them in private AKS. But the problem in testing is the communication or implementation that I perform from Azure DevOps, specifically the configuration of a service connection to CI/CD. Apart from the indications of Microsoft, do you have any implementation guide to help me understand to deploy better CD? This was too big for me to grasp, to be honest. Let's go through it again. 3 deployment environments, each in Kubernetes service independent. I must deploy them in private AKS. But the problem in testing is the communication implementation I perform from. So if I understand right, the problem is that you cannot access from Azure DevOps your clusters, right? But if the problem is that you cannot access secure coding development, just put more comments if I'm making wrong assumption. But this is the part where actually GitOps helps a lot because it's a pool-based model. Instead of trying to access your cluster from somewhere, let's say Azure DevOps or whatever, to deploy or whatever you want to do, you have actually an agent of sorts running inside of your cluster that is pulling information from Git and doing whatever needs to be done. So if you would use something like Argo CD or Flux, your Azure DevOps pipeline would do whatever it's doing right now, building, testing, etc., etc. But when it comes to deployment, it would actually interact with Git, not with your cluster. So whatever trouble you have connecting to that cluster would be gone, unless I misunderstood the question, which is very likely. Advice on running Kafka on Kubernetes, any tool or projects for it? This is embarrassing. I run Kafka as a service only, so I don't know.
I know 2 services that are meant to run on Kubernetes. One is Strimzi. I think Strimzi is a Red Hat backed project. It runs Kafka on Kubernetes. It has like a lot of operators, so you can do a lot of GitOps way of configuring Kafka. It seems to be quite popular. I know quite a few people who are using Strimzi and are happy with that. The other tool that I know is called Red Panda. It's a Kafka. It's not Kafka itself, but it's a Kafka compatible solution that has also apparently, what I read from the docs, quite good support for Kubernetes. So these are actually the only 2 projects I know that have really kind of a focus on Kubernetes.
There you go. He knows more than me. Manes Hippocrates, thanks for the video on Octeto some time ago. Thank you for thanking me. Any good place to start for developers wishing to practice Kubernetes? Normally I would say, hey, this channel, but this channel is actually not really good necessarily for people starting because there is no structured kind of structure in videos. There is no do this first and that first and that first. So you probably should look for something closer to the training. What I would advise is, I forgot the name and I'm ashamed now, but if you check Civo folks, they're having Kube Simplify, I think, which is probably a better place to start. So search for Kube Simplify, you will find it.
Is it a tutorial or is it a kind of a getting started in Kubernetes?
Yeah, getting started type of tutorial is done by the guys at Civo, and it's pretty awesome. Now I must be honest, I haven't went through it in depth because I'm a bit beyond getting started type of stuff. But for what I've seen from others, it's absolutely fantastic. So check it out. Okay, we have a couple of minutes left. Any other questions? Be fast. We have one from Tech5. What do you think comes after Kubernetes? We got hyper-isolation of processes and infra orchestration, serverless containers, Kubernetes. What paradigm shift comes next? I'll let you answer that, Vadim, if you have any insight. But I think that Kubernetes, I mean, there is so much unexplored with Kubernetes that I don't see anything necessarily coming in the near future.
Uh, We're
Because
gonna
from
be the the uh, the gorilla types, like silverbacks of in 20 years, the ones who knowing Kubernetes when every young generation moved on, because it's gonna be still around like COBOL, you know. So we're gonna be the ones uh, hired back after our retirement because we need to fix some Kubernetes cluster somewhere. This is what I think. I mean, Kubernetes is gonna stick around for quite a long time, especially in the construct that Kubernetes currently is in. You know, there's a lot of contributions from many companies, and many big companies are betting on Kubernetes as their foundation and contributing to it. So I guess it's gonna be Kubernetes for quite a long time. It's gonna change its shape and how you deploy workloads. Like WASM is the next big thing probably, you know, but I think it still can run on Kubernetes. You know, you still need to orchestrate those things, right? So if it's yeah. So this is my personal opinion. So we're gonna be the silverbacks of container in 20 years.
I think that's I think when answering questions like this, it is very important to distinguish what do people think by Kubernetes. If that question means what comes after Kubernetes being something that runs my container, runs everything as a container, that is going to be replaced or extended or changed relatively soon, like WASM, for example. But then there is a much bigger context of Kubernetes being extensible API and scheduler. That is staying for much longer. So parts of Kubernetes will be, I'm not going to say replaced, but will be extended, or other ways will be in parallel. So what runs in a Kubernetes cluster, that is having much shorter lifespan than Kubernetes in terms of extensible API and scheduling, right? That's staying much longer. So in 20 years, Vadim, you and me might still be using Kubernetes, but that might not be for the purpose of running applications as containers.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think the Kubernetes will change itself. It will still be called Kubernetes, but the concept will be the same, but how we are using would be maybe completely different.
So WASM in Kubernetes.
You know, it needs to be orchestrated somehow, right?
Exactly. What else? Do we have anything else? Event bus implementation, collect data from the services would be a solution. That's a question. If it is, which one do you recommend, Nuts or Kafka? I have very limited experience. I mean, I have some, but very limited. Nuts is much more lightweight, and it's, from my perspective, perfectly suitable if you have, especially for third-party vendors. If you have a solution that relies on events or somehow, or event bus, I would package Nuts or make it depending on Nuts. If it needs to depend on one thing, then Kafka any time of the day, simply because it's extremely lightweight, right? It runs in Kubernetes like a charm, but it's not as robust as Kafka, so you will not get everything you get with Kafka.
Yeah, I see. I've seen a few applications that have like inter-service communication done with Nuts. It's fairly small applications that has like connecting the in-application communication over Nuts, and Kafka is mostly used in a bigger scope, like across organization, across different teams and organizational units, or even to external customers. So I think the scale is a bit a different one, you know. But those products are great for on their own, you know. So it depends a bit on the use case, but on the scale you have.
There we go. What's the next one from Miles? What open source projects are you involved in that you think could use the most help and or contributions at the moment? From my side, that's Crossplane, and I'm pretty sure I know Vadim's answer. Uh,
I mean, Harbor is definitely would like to have more contributors. We are always eager to have contributors. What other project I'm looking into is CDK8S is a really, in my opinion, underrepresented and underrated project that need definitely a lot of work. It has a lot of potential, and there are just a few people from AWS supporting it. These are which comes to my mind. And also on the security level, like on the Kubernetes security secrets level, if you're not talking about Vault, but things like SOPs or secrets, I think there's also a few projects that could need a bit support.
especially secrets. Sorry for that. Especially that I think that not long from now we will need to rethink secrets in Kubernetes. And in this case, I don't mean like SOPs, tools that manage somehow Kubernetes secrets, but secrets themselves. That's one of the Kubernetes Achilles heels in a way that we cannot avoid because simply everything depends. Almost every third, I'm pretty sure that Harbor as well, the Crossplane today as well, everything depends on secrets, and secrets are not really good. No matter how you manage it outside, it ends up being a Kubernetes secret that anybody can read one way or another. Okay, what else? Do we have a few more minutes? Yes. From Gaurav, how can we learn and understand how to build anything as a service like cloud services? That's tough. That's tough. Every team, I mean, I've been in a couple of teams starting building cloud services as if SaaS offering, right? And for a long time, that ended up being a nightmare, right? Because you make assumptions and then you get your first 10 clients and then it works and then you get 50 clients and then it fails and so on and so forth. It's one of the biggest nightmares I think I've had so far.
So I think, yeah, we have to a bit maybe distinguish the question because the context is not clear. Like, do you want to run everything as a service, as a software as a service, like selling it to someone, or do you want to run it internally for inside your organization, like as a service? And like, if you want to run it as a service kind of thing, like where you're not selling it but using internally, then of course product thinking is very important. Like you have to think how the consumer is thinking, how the consumer of your product is thinking, how he's gonna use the product, treat him as a customer, like you would, sell it to the on the market, kind of treat it.
And without forcing, right? What I've seen in many companies is kind of, hey, we have this team that creates internal services, and then they go to CTO and CTO orders everybody in the company to use it. That's the biggest mistake I've seen, because then if you force people to use something, they're not your customers. Then you're not doing what Vadim said. If people have no options, then they're going to stick with what they have, and your service is going to be bad.
It makes people a bit lazy to on the provider side, because you have to use it, right? So there is no incentive to provide a good service, because you have to use it anyway. You have no second option, and it leads to bad quality services and unhappy users.
Okay, this is the last one because I have a hard stop at 30 past. My company is outdated. With huge effort, I put Tomcats running all Java code in a Compose stack. It has 6 containers now. What is your advice to migrate it to Kubernetes on-premise cluster? Now, the good news is that there are some, but no significant differences whether it's on-prem or no. If your cluster is running and it's configured and it's doing what it's supposed to do, from the application perspective, it's more or less the same, more or less. And the advice is, it's a bit complicated, because I think that Compose is a dead end, meaning that I use Compose heavily in the past. I'm a Docker fanboy, but you cannot just convert that to Kubernetes without really, and this is going back to one of the answers. You need to understand Kubernetes decently well, not necessarily 7 years of expertise, but decently well, because simply Compose does not translate to Kubernetes. You need to figure out what is a service, what is a deployment, whether you should use virtual services, what is ingress, how the pods work, what is the relation between pods and higher level constructs. You need to master. You cannot just say, I'm going to use some tool and convert my Compose definitions into Kubernetes, and that will work. That will work until it doesn't, and then it's going to be a nightmare. So learn the basics at least. And one more thing, when you learn the basics, people are tempted to start with all the shiny things. Like I'm going to start from day one with service mesh, and I'm going to do canary deployments, and I'm going
GitOps.
to do GitOps, and I'm going to do everything, right? Just kind of basic Kubernetes. I would recommend starting with Kubernetes without any add-ons. That's not going to be even close to being great, but it's a better start than just being overwhelmed. If you make a mistake and go to CNCF landscape and say, this is where I start, nobody will see you for 5 years.
That's true. Yeah, start small.
Thank you everybody for coming. We have to stop here. Thank you so much. See you next Thursday, every Thursday, unless it's not, because sometimes we travel. Thank you, Vadim, for being a guest. Go and check out.
Everyone.
I have a short info about Vadim in the company in the description. Go and check it out. Use Harbor. It's awesome.
Hey. Bye-bye, everyone.